Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Remember when I said that most franchises tend to find their groove by the third entry? I began development of the game on the 29th of April, seemingly on a whim. At the time, I had made multiple attempts to branch out, none of which have really been successful. All I've really achieved in all that time was a singular one-shot that was remotely decent, but even then I consider it a fluke. Honestly, I really feel like I stagnated in those few months following the release of the last game. I haven't gone to college yet, and I wasn't able to get anything done. Eventually, I figured that I might as well just stick to what I'm good at and return to programming. When I came back, I looked into making text-adventure games. At the time, I thought it was a charming concept, and I even considered creating a serious project around the idea. Of course, I didn't make it far with that either, because I eventually lost interest. After that, I just went ahead and began making the third game because it was something I actually wanted to make. It's an idea that draws inspiration from many sources like Kingdom Hearts, Shin Megami Tensei, Dissidia Final Fantasy, and most importantly, Mugen simultaneous battles. I know that sounds like a really odd combination. The idea dates back to years ago when I was properly exposed to Kingdom Hearts and grew to love its combat system and interface. The idea then just evolved from there as I came across more media. I guess I could view it as a love letter to the various media that I liked, as corny as that sounds. Now on to the game itself. As the third game in the series, it's a massive step up from everything I've made before. It essentially takes the ideas introduced by the previous two entries and improves upon them immensely, all the while fixing what didn't work. The general synopsis for Remedy is that of an action-adventure game with a slight focus on resource management. You must traverse a very hostile environment while collecting supplies and avoiding enemies along the way. If you fail to avoid an enemy, combat will be initiated. The game's combat system is actually quite simple. You see those two bars at the bottom left of the screen? The red gauge represents Mary's life, while the purple gauge represents his morale. In combat, they both function as the two main resources that the player has access to. Life is the representation of Mary's will to live, as well as his capability to avoid fatal injury. It's basically the health of this game. If it hits 0, it's game over. Morale, however, reflects one's capacity to harness their inner darkness. It serves as the representation of Mary's perseverance, composure, and discipline. All in all, it's much more abstract in nature when compared to life. In my opinion, morale should be treated strictly as a game mechanic, nothing more. Alright, that should be it for the absolute basics. Now we can move on to talk about Mary's moveset, along with the baseline mechanics that he as a combatant is bound by. Starting with Mary's basic attack, it is an action that the player could always rely on. It's fast, doesn't cost anything to use, and it applies decent hit stun. The only caveat is that the attack doesn't inflict any damage to the target's life, but rather morale. How morale damage would work is that the assailant's morale will be increased by the amount of damage that was inflicted. With this in mind, Mary's attack serves as the best way to regain morale for himself and others. Other than that, it also works well as a stalling tool, and as filler for combos.
Good.
The main purpose of morale is to serve as a resource required to perform special actions. In Mary's case, it's used to perform weapon techniques, which are actions that are somewhat related to the sub-weapon you've selected at the start of the game. Unlike the previous game, where the use of weapon techniques is merely optional, they are practically required in order for Mary to inflict damage consistently. This means that weapon techniques will have a lot of influence over how you play, depending on what you choose. Now, if we put all of these mechanics together, you'll have the core combat loop. All you have to do is increase your morale by attacking, then once you have enough, You can use your weapon techniques to inflict damage. Repeat until the opposition is eliminated. It doesn't always go that smoothly though, otherwise it would make for a pretty boring experience. There are a number of mechanics and systems that could greatly complicate this sequence, starting with auto-evade. The secondary purpose of morale is to serve as a buffer towards Mary's life. You see, Mary will automatically dodge most attacks at the cost of morale. Attacks that can't be dodged are usually telegraphed and easy to react to. Auto-evade does have its limits though. For instance, there are a number of ways for it to be bypassed, the most common of which is getting hit after whiffing an attack, or while performing certain actions. The primary limit is Mary's own morale. Despondence is a status element that Mary receives when his morale goes below 0 for any reason. For as long as it remains active, Mary will be unable to perform his weapon techniques. It also makes it so his auto-evade is much easier to bypass as well. Mary's morale does regenerate on its own, and the effect ends when his morale reaches the initial amount he had at the start of the battle. You can also expedite the process by attacking to get out of despondence at a quicker rate. In all seriousness, despondence is a status effect that you really don't want to have. It slows progress towards winning the battle to a screeching halt, and makes you extremely vulnerable on top of that. The player must carefully manage their morale and decide when it's the best time to use it, because putting all of your eggs in one basket could easily put you at risk. Luckily, if worse comes to worse, Mary knows a few tricks that will keep him alive for a little while longer. Mary has 2 defensive actions that he can fall back on when things get too hot to handle. They're not to be used recklessly though, because both actions cost life to use, but not in the way you might think. You see, whenever a combatant uses their life to perform an action, the amount used gets converted to exhaustion instead of being lost forever. Then over time, their exhaustion will slowly be converted back to life. Essentially, your health also doubles as a stamina gauge. Using defensive actions too often might leave you in a position where you're one hit away from dying for a time. And as you take damage, you won't be able to use these actions as often as you would be at full health. I know you might be confused by some of the decisions I've made regarding the game's combat system, but I assure you that there is a logic to it. It all comes down to the game's design philosophy. The general idea behind this series is that you're meant to be a fragile human struggling against forces that are way beyond you. When you take that idea into consideration, a lot of my design decisions begin to make sense. Why doesn't Mary's basic attack inflict any damage? Because he's a human fighting against actual monsters. Punching them with his bare hands wouldn't be very effective, so he relies on his weapon to defend himself. In a way, morale damage can be framed as the victim tanking or avoiding the attack entirely. And despondence could be seen as Mary losing his composure, now acting out of despair rather than the resolve needed to actually be effective. There is an intentional power imbalance between you, the player, and the enemies. For you, there will be moments of downtime where you're forced to play defensively, either to regain morale or recover lost life. The enemies, however, do not share the same restrictions you do. They don't have downtime, they don't have to worry about exhaustion or morale. They are free to attack you relentlessly with no remorse. In such a state of affairs, any lone human would inevitably get overwhelmed. So what are you supposed to do? The solution is obvious. If it's too dangerous to go alone, then don't. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce you to Erwin, the first companion to be added to the game. Companions are allies who will accompany you throughout your journey. They're sort of like the spiritual successor to familiars from Errand Run, but this time I actually know what I'm doing. I really took the time to think about how exactly companions should be designed. Having been a big fan of the AI teammates from my favorite video games, I obviously would want them in my own game as well. The answer I've come to realize is quite a simple one, and it all traces back to the inherent power imbalance I explained earlier. An imbalance that companions are meant to solve. Mary is not weak. Mechanically weak, that is. He's already more than capable of handling himself with just his base kit. However, his greatest weakness is that his limitations slow him down, and his fragility is comparable to a house of cards. Sure, it is possible for Mary to perform a 10-hit combo on a single enemy, but then he would be left completely defenseless, and that is a death sentence in a game where you're likely to fight multiple enemies at once. Companions are there to provide the stability that Mary lacks. They're designed to prevent the player from getting overwhelmed and act as a safety net in the event that they make a mistake. Basically as another buffer of sorts. I figured this was probably the best way to do it. Like, I sort of had to draw it from my experience of playing Mugen simultaneous battles, so I had no other reference to go on. Nevertheless, this philosophy does well as a guideline for how companions should be designed. A companion can be categorized into one of 3 different archetypes: Mavericks, Sentinels, and Confidants, with each one covering a specific playstyle for a variety of players. The first archetype we'll be covering are Mavericks. Their job is to simplify encounters through disruption and drawing enemy aggro, allowing the player to focus on other enemies on the battlefield, or perhaps use the opportunity to heal or get free damage in. Mavericks are also made to be more self-sufficient in order to suit their purpose, having defensive actions of their own on top of auto-evade. They are the best at avoiding damage than any other companion. They're essentially the rogue archetype, tricksters if you want to be fancy about it. As a natural drawback, Mavericks have little ways to provide direct help to Mary. The best they can do is disrupt the enemy and draw aggro. It's left up to the player to capitalize on the opportunities their companion has opened for them. Next up, we have the Sentinel archetype, which is possibly the most straightforward of the 3. Their job is to simply provide meaningful backup and protection, allowing the player to resign to other roles such as support or flank. Sentinels are meant to be the best at covering the player's weaknesses. They can be a tank, a damage dealer, or perhaps a mix of both aspects. They're essentially the Guardian archetype as they rival the player in terms of influence over the game state. The one weakness that all Sentinels share, however, is their utter lack of self-sustain. They can provide invaluable support, but they're much more likely to take damage while doing so. And believe me, that damage will add up over time. In a sense, they're effectively the opposite of Mavericks. And finally, we have Confidants, the most unique out of the 3 archetypes. Their job is to directly supplement the player's combat capabilities, reminiscent of familiars from Errand Run. They act more as an extension to Mary's moveset, than as a separate entity. What exactly counts as a confidant is very broad, so there isn't a straight answer to what role they're supposed to play. They're the wild card, you see. Anything could be classified as a confidant, from a regular animal to a sentient floating sword. There is one drawback, however, and it's that confidants will rarely act on their own unless it's in self-defense. This means that the player will have to fully rely on their companion's assists to get some use out of them, all the while they must deal with the full blunt of the enemy opposition. Oh yeah, we should probably talk about assists. As you may have guessed by now, companions are AI controlled. They cannot be fully controlled because you are not them. Besides, it wouldn't exactly work with the genre this game is a part of, since it technically counts as an action RPG. Like, you are playing a role after all. I don't know, I might need a second opinion on this one. Anyways, assists are there to mitigate the issue of unpredictability that AI teammates inherently provide. How it would work is an assist can be called through player input, and then the companion will try to perform that assist at the earliest opportunity. Assists are not free to use, however, as they still cost some sort of resource. Most notably, the companion's morale in most cases. There may be some other special conditions that must be met in order for a specific assist to be callable. Out of everything in the game, companions are probably the most contentious. If poorly executed, they might ruin the whole gameplay experience for most people, but if done correctly, they could elevate that experience in a way that makes my game stand out from the rest. There is a delicate balance that must be achieved, that much I know for sure. Companions are the defining mechanic of Remedy, so I want them to be engaging to interact with. At the very least, I want to make it so that the player is better off working with their companion than not. Learning how to play around your AI teammates can be a skill in and of itself. I want companions to not be too strong as to play the game for you, but just strong enough that you will feel their absence when they die. Cover their back, and they'll cover yours. If your companion's in danger, you're expected to help them, just as they're expected to help you when you're in trouble. Okay, that should be it for the fundamentals of combat. Before we could move on, I think it would be appropriate to explain how exactly combat fits with the rest of the game. It is an important part of the entire experience, so there must be some justification for its existence, right? Let's get one thing out of the way first. There is nothing to gain from winning combat. There's no items to get, nor any experience points to earn either. The only thing the player could earn through combat is a negligible amount of supplies, but that's only there to prevent soft locks. Ultimately, there's little actual incentive for the player to enter combat intentionally, at least intrinsically anyway. Any damage sustained in a single encounter will carry over to every subsequent battle afterwards. This also applies to certain status elements, some of which even having an effect outside of combat. If anything, combat is more like a punishment. You're more likely to come out of the encounter worse off than before unless you're skilled enough. Rather, the true purpose of combat is to give the player an actual reason to use their resources. Speaking of resources, this is supposed to be a game that involves resource management, isn't it? So where does that come into play? To answer that, we might need to talk about supplies and consumable items, the two main resources that the player will have to manage if they want to succeed. Supplies are an abstract concept in the sense that they are a representation of the party's raw resources. It's currency, basically, but reskinned to fit the setting. Mainly obtainable through interacting with pickups scattered around the map. You'll know when you see them. Consumable items, however, are a lot more straightforward. Most of them can be used at any time, and they provide a variety of different effects like healing or curing status elements. Out in the field, they are much harder to come across than supplies. In fact, that isn't even the main way to obtain them, which is something we'll get to shortly. Placed sparsely around the map are save points that can be used to save your progress. Pretty standard video game stuff, but there's also a special type of save point that will grant you access to the rest menu when interacted with. The rest menu is where you can spend your supplies, heal your party, or craft consumable items. That is literally it. Yeah, surprisingly I was able to explain it in one sentence. Thought it would take more than that. The menu itself grants the player a decent amount of freedom on how they want to do things. For instance, you can choose exactly how much life you want to restore and what status elements you wish to cure. You also have the option to recycle unwanted items to get some supplies in return. I am aware that this might just be the bare minimum by indie game standards. At the very least, there would be enough depth and nuance to open the window for some interesting decisions on the player's part. That is one of the things I wish to achieve when making the game. Okay, that should be everything I wanted to talk about. I've been spending way too much time just to write the script, and I'm really starting to remember why I hate making scripted videos. I had to re-record. I had to. Oh my god! I had to re-record the same lines over and over because I keep messing up at the same bits. Hopefully, the end result will do a good enough job on explaining what this game's about and what to expect from it. Because I am not going to do another one of these for a long time. Thank you very much. The game is currently in its alpha stages, and at the time of voicing this, I had just finished a quality of life update. It has nothing too major, just some stuff that I think would better the experience. Next up on the agenda would be implementing more content to the game, like more sub-weapons, companions, enemies, and areas. It's weird in a way. This might just be the most focused I've ever been with a project. There is rarely a moment in development where I feel lost on what to do next. Like it's a acute awareness of what will work and what doesn't, along with what systems I would need to implement to achieve what I wanted. The power of a checklist is really something that shouldn't be slept on. With it, I always have this feeling of satisfaction when I check something off the list, which is probably why I managed to finish my previous game and got so far with this one. Even if it takes 3 years, with the experience I've gained, I am confident I could finish this project. That I will promise. If you wish to keep track of this game's development, I have prepared a Game Jolt page that you can follow. From there you'll be notified of any updates, and you'll also be notified when the game finally gets released. There is an itch.io page as well, but I don't think there's any way to follow a game page on there. Like, you would think they would have it, but they don't for some reason. Your only options in that regard would be to follow my itch account or subscribing to the devlog posts on the community forums. If you don't want to do that either, I also have a Twitter and Blue Sky account you can follow if you want. I post the same stuff on there as well as some miscellaneous things. I also made a website you could visit if you want to learn more about the series this game is a part of. Links are all in the description. Okay, that should actually be everything I want to say. For real this time. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment especially. Do not be afraid to express your thoughts. Any feedback at all is very much appreciated. Anyways, I'll see you guys later.